Welcome to another edition of Trunk and Tales as we navigate what is happening in the world of politics. I'm Stacy Smith, and if you happen to be watching or listening to this program, I urge that you hit the like or the subscribe button. Now, the 2024 election is nearly here, and the polls indicate it is neck and neck between Harris and Trump. But there are some who think the polls have it wrong. That's part of what we'll discuss today in this edition of Trunk and Tales. With me to talk about this is my panel of political analysts and experts, and they are the former Republican governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Corbett. Mr. Corbett also served as the state attorney general and as the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Tom teaches law now at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. Also joining us is Jim Byrne. Jim is the chairman emeritus of the state Democratic Party in Pennsylvania. Jim also served in city and county government, and while never abandoning politics, Jim practices law in the city of Pittsburgh. Joining us also is Keith Schmidt. Keith was the state director for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum. Keith also consulted on Santorum's 2012 presidential bid, and Keith has his own consulting firm. Also joining us is Joe Mistick. Joe's background includes consulting Democrats across the state and serving in city government. Joe teaches law at Duquesne University, and you can read his thoughts on life and politics in the Tribune Review. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Hard to believe, but we're almost at Election Day. Are you all ready for this? I mean, this is a different race for sure.
I'm ready. I'm ready for the commercials to be gone. I'm ready for the people to get in and vote. What did we hear? Something like 50 million have already voted across the country. We don't have too many more left. No, we do. Yeah. But I'm ready, and I think everybody else is ready for it.
I would happen to agree, because we are just days away from the 2024 election, and it's been an election cycle like no other, I don't think. A one-time president defeated in his second chance for the presidency is now running for a third time. An assassination attempt, a candidate dropping out of the race, and his replacement chosen without going through the primaries, but who did win nomination overwhelmingly at the party convention. With all of that, just about every poll shows it's a dead even race between Vice President Harris and former President Donald Trump. Now, according to the Real Clear average of polls, Trump has a 1-point lead over Harris, and the 538 polling shows Trump with a 0.3 lead. So I know how you guys disdain polls, but we are getting very close to the election. So we're about a week out. Joe, let's start with you. What's your reaction, and then everybody else jump in.
Well, as you just said, Stacy, we're not big fans of polls, and there's a good reason. They've been wrong more often than they've been right lately. I think in the last election, they underestimated Trump, and they've made an adjustment since then. But I think they've overcompensated. I think they've overadjusted. So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that I think that Kamala Harris wins, but by a wider margin than any of these polls are indicating.
Well, you only looked at two. There were only two polls. I mean, I can pull five up right now that have Harris 3 to 4 points up in the 5 swing states, and I can show you numbers on the early turnout that show that the Democratic folks, the independents that are breaking Harris, and the Republicans who have left the Republican nominee are coming out in historic numbers for the early voting, which is a huge advantage for Democrats. I can show you where the Republicans that are coming out and voting now because they want this over, based on the exit polling, are breaking heavy for Harris. So it really depends on which poll you want to talk about and what you think it means. At the end of the day, when you get to the last 7 days of the race, especially one as historic as this, it's going to be about field, it's going to be about message, it's going to be about closing. And so far on all three of those fronts, the advantage is to Harris.
All right, I will just defend the polls that I put out there. I didn't point out a singular poll or two. What I did was the average of polls from the Real Clear Politics. That's an average of the polls, and then the second one was 538, which also has his own method of averaging the polls. So it was not a singular or two polls that I showed there.
You can look at the polling of the 5 swing states, and you'll see my numbers. They're there and they're real. So it is what it is. We can talk about polls all we want. It's about those 3 items every single time. I don't care who's on the ballot. Who has a better field, who has a better close, who has a better get out the vote. And those things are all breaking heavy Kamala Harris. And if Tom or or Keith have anything to rebut that on anything they're seeing from their side, yeah, please share it. That's why we're here.
Well, I don't believe in the polls at all in these races. I mean, they've been polling on this for the last 4 years. They had to change the candidates when Biden dropped out, but they've been polling. And I don't. When I was a candidate, I didn't trust the polls. I always considered I was running behind, and worked very hard at that standpoint. But it's been such an unusual campaign, changing the candidate in midstream. And Stacey made a good point. They did it without having a vote of the party, the Democrat Party across the country. It was just the committee that selected the candidate. That's the way politics works, and so that's permitted. But I've always said that is there going to be an October surprise or an October fumble? I think the event that they did in New York, and the speaker in New York that was making jokes about something was the biggest fumble I've seen in a political campaign, probably in my lifetime.
Yeah, but the governor, the question I would pose is do you really think that's going to have much of an effect on the electorate?
Yes.
I mean, that they're really going to pay attention to that.
I think is a segment, a very small segment, that is paying attention to it. And when you're talking about margins of 1%, 2%, 3%, it didn't help you. It certainly didn't help you.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one Republican say it was a good night for Mr. Trump in Madison Square Garden.
No.
Not one. And in a race, like the governor said, as tight as this, it could prove to be fatal.
Yeah. Might. Okay. Keith, we haven't heard from you yet.
It could prove to be fatal. It probably will.
I have a hard time hearing the former governor, and I'm not sure if it's just a technical thing on my computer, but he's coming across very faintly. So I don't know if you can talk a little louder for me, Gov. I'm getting old. But I think I got the gist of what you were saying. Listen, I'm going to, in a gentlemanly fashion, disagree with my Democratic counterparts. But, I have a sense, whether it be Kamala Harris or the former president, I'm starting to believe that we're going to have a winner on election night. I really do. I mean, for a long time, I talked about the concern over this dragging out, or on both sides, what antics might take place. But there's a sense here, and a lot of times that happens when it's so tight. Just something just breaks. And you're making a solid argument of why you think it's going to break for Kamala Harris. I mean, I have a sense, big surprise, that the opposite is happening. I look at a lot of different trends that make me feel like, first of all, I believe what Joe said was corrected. I'm not sure it was corrected. I do believe in an undervote for President Trump. I mean, I believe that we've said it ad nauseum. People like or embrace his policies, but the antics and the deliverables and how his personality makes people uncomfortable. And there's polling that suggests people are disingenuous to their own spouse or neighbor or best friend because they don't want to defend it, but they're going to vote for him. But they don't want to talk about it because elections are about choices, and they like his policies. But their personality, there's some concerns there, and that accounts to a degree with that 5 or 6% lead that Hillary Clinton enjoyed going into the 16 race, and somehow he pulled a rabbit out of a hat that night. So there is a sense that vote could be an undervote of 2 or 3%, and then just the general movement of the parties. Somebody shared a number with me. I was looking at the Obama numbers, but if you go back to when we elected the former governor of Pennsylvania, the deficit for Republicans in Pennsylvania at that time was 1.6 million. And now the last data that I received 2 days ago shows that that's dipped under 300,000. It's around 288,000. That's a sizable change in registration. The Wall Street Journal the analysis they did 2 or 3 weeks ago that said for the first time in our lifetime, more people associate themselves with the Republican Party than the Democrat. That's unheard of. And in fact, I even have a hard time, and I'm on this side of the aisle, believing that. That's a very interesting analysis that I would have never suspected. Again, it could be they registered. It's not necessarily registered. It's just how they affiliate themselves. And the fact, listen, there's less than half nationwide of mail-in ballots this time, and the gap between the Democrats and Republicans is tighter. The Democrats are clearly doing a better job, but the percentage differential is smaller. And the last thing I'll say is a conversation I was in last Friday, a roundtable that talked about the intensity of the vote. Listen, and again, my Democratic counterparts, I'm sure, are going to disagree with me, but a largesse of Kamala's support is they have a disdain for the former president. They are voting against the former president more than they're voting for Kamala Harris. And the only reason I say that is there's going to be long lines on Tuesday. I've already set I'm getting to the poll run. Unfortunately, I tried to vote yesterday because it was the last day to vote, and they were lined up around Grant Street and down the. I wasn't going to stand in that line. So now I'm going to go to the poll at like 6 o'clock and camp out, and I want to try to be one of the first because I don't want to stand in a long line. But the lines are a factor because by around a 3% differential, you'll stand in a long line longer if you're voting for somebody, not voting against somebody. So if I have to get up at 5 in the morning and they tell me the line's 2 hours long and I'm there just to vote against Trump and not for Kamala, that could be a concern. I mean, the patience of people to stand in line. And I would suggest the contingents that are voting for Trump, the people that go to these rallies and whatnot, they'll walk on glass and they'll wait 5 hours. They're not going to not vote. So that intensity thing could be in a close race, could mean something too. So I might be wrong. She might win on election night. But my sense is it's breaking one way or the other. I don't think we're going to go 2 weeks. I think we're going to have a winner on election night.
Maybe
I'm
that
just up the
explains why
hill
they're
from the
walking
county
out of
office
his
building,
rallies to
and
get in
that's
line to
where they were
vote.
lined up to vote. I'm just up the hill from the county office building. That's where they were lined up to vote. It was lined up out the door of the county office building, up the sidewalk, and into the Manor Building parking garage. So that's quite a
I
line.
kept
Now,
driving.
yeah. No, I think that what people brought to my attention was that it appeared to be mostly women in that line, more women than men. And what I take away from that is that that woman vote, that reversal of Roe v. Wade, and women being enthused, being motivated, being determined to stand up for their right to make their own health decisions. So we'll see. I mean, this is what a time to be alive. This is the greatest election of our lives, perhaps the most consequential election of our lives. And for those of us who do this or are on the fringes of doing this at this stage in life, this is as good as it gets.
I happen to agree with you on that. Jim, you were going to make a point of something that Keith said as well.
Oh yeah, thanks, Stacey. I was just having a little fun with Keith. I mean, there is no doubt there's a lot of intensity with the Trump supporters. Perhaps them being so eager to get in line explains why they're walking out of his rallies en masse.
All right, maybe. Governor, what's the possibility, Governor, that with the mail-in voting, even though, as Keith points out, in Pennsylvania, at least it's down about 1 million from what it was in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. But there's talk about cannibalizing the vote. In other words, that maybe Keith doesn't have it right, that maybe people are using the mail-in vote and they're not going to show up at the polls on election day.
Well, I think if you look at the number of votes that have already come in, clearly now compared to way back in 2010 and 14 when I ran, when the only way you could mail in was absentee, it has certainly increased, and it's going to have less people at the polls. But I think this is an election that's going to have more people total coming out. Either they're doing it through the mail or they're doing it in person. I'm going to agree with Keith. I think it's going to be quicker than what counterparts that we have over in Philadelphia are saying. They're saying it's going to be 4 or 5 days before they get the numbers counted. I think that they're trying to under-promise and overperform because of the technology that's now in place in counties like Philadelphia and Allegheny County to count the votes much more quickly than they were able to do it. Also with the fact that because they receive state and federal money for these new machines, they now have to count around the clock, 24 hours. They can't take breaks. They can put a new shift in, but they can't take breaks. So that should resolve that a little more quickly. So I think that, my election for Attorney General in 2008 went until the next day, even though the AP called it for my opponent, and I won by 100,000 votes. So it wasn't even, really close. But I think we'll know the next day where we are in Pennsylvania. I don't know about the nation.
Well, here's an
I
astonishing
think it's
fact. As for the mail-in vote in Allegheny County, the governor and I both toured the warehouse, which is where all of the votes come in and where they're counted. The mail-in vote, and I'm going to be a little more liberal than the elections department people told us. We'll have the mail-in vote by 8:05 on election night. We'll have that total of the mail-in vote in Allegheny County. They said within 2 minutes or so. I mean, something like that. But I'm going to cut them a little slack. I'll take them up to 8:05. But we do it right. Nobody does it as good as we do it, and we have a commitment to doing it right. We've spent the money on the right equipment, and the warehouse gets flooded with county employees who are otherwise not working on that day. So they've all been reassigned to the warehouse to assist the elections department. It's an amazing feat.
Well, if it's anything like the county executive race last year, we had the mail-in numbers at 8:03. We had literally
Yes,
3 minutes
right.
after we got an email
Astonishing.
with the total
That's
for
right,
both
Keith.
candidates. That quick.
Yeah, that's right.
you could
Astonishing.
you could tell you could tell when those hit, Keith. You could tell what was going to happen. You really could. I mean, you didn't see the
Right.
bump. You didn't see the bump that we thought Joe Rocky might have. And it looked like, oh, he may not be able to catch Sarah. But conversely, you didn't see the bump that what was the Democratic nominee? I can't remember his name. You didn't see the bump that he had for Zapala, so you knew Steve could catch him.
Right.
Based on what we knew. So it's very telling, guys. And when Allegheny County's totals come in, look for these percentages. Hillary in 16 in Allegheny County was 52 or 53% over Trump, and she lost the state barely. Mr. Biden was 54 or 55, I think, over Mr. Trump. He barely wins the state. Fetterman, 60% over his opponent. He wins the state. So at the end of the day, let's kind of see if that gives us any type of an indicator when Allegheny County's votes are total.
Stacy, maybe we should explain to people who may watch this how they can get that answer so fast. And
Okay, please do.
with the mail-in ballots starting at 7 o'clock in the morning, they can put those the envelopes through a machine that separates the outer envelope and then the inner envelope and stacks up the ballot itself at 7 in the morning when the polls open. Then those ballots sit there until 8:01 or 8 o'clock, when they can then feed it into a different machine and counts it. And the other thing I want to make the point is, because one of the rumors we heard, well, outside influences can hack into this. None of this material, none of these machines are connected to the internet. Not the ones
Nope.
that you go and vote on in person, nor the ones who do the vote counting at the warehouse on the north side.
All right, two questions, and this pertains also to Pennsylvania, and nationwide. Do you think the turnout's going to be average, higher, lower in the presidential race this year?
I look for a
it's
big
gonna be
turnout.
Higher.
Yeah, I think
it's
I
going to be
agree with Keith.
I think
Very
it
high.
might be a historical turnout, don't you, Joe?
I do. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
not seen this much at stake, and I've not seen the voters realize how much is at stake in this election as much as they do. It's an amazing thing. I guess after the election we'll be able to watch TV again if you live in Pennsylvania or Allegheny County, but we'll also know that we played a major role in the selection of the next president of the United States.
I don't disagree with you,
It,
but I'm going to make this observation. We've seen the commercials on for what, 10 months now, almost 11 months in this race, and we've been inundated by that. Did it really reflect on everybody willing to come out? I mean, I should have looked it up to see what the average turnout is for a presidential election. Do I think it's going to be above the average? Yes. Do I think it's going to be historical? I'm not so sure it is, because I think people are disgusted with the whole thing.
Let me add one other thought that I just had came to my noodle here when I was making my original case. I said either Kamala or the former president I thought was going to win on election night. My sense is somebody's going to win on election night. Another thing I think that I look at is the fact that the current vice president has broken every fundraising record in the history of the presidency. And depending on who you listen to, it's somewhere between 6.5 and 7 times, including coordinated money, times what the Trump campaign has. So you can make your argument the way you want. I'm not looking to fight here, but just saying that when you have 7 times the money and maybe 7 times the exposure, and they're not buying what you're selling, there is concern. I mean, I have friends at the DNC from college. I mean, there are people a little worried that there's such an overwhelming advantage in money and in advertising and in social media and everything else, but they have a product that's not being purchased. So that bodes well, I think, for Trump's chances too. And you wonder, because we're so inundated with it, does it start to work against you when you just constantly see these ads and you've made a decision, you're getting irritated? Are you more irritated at the person putting all these ads on? I don't know. But I've never in 44 years of running races, if somebody gave me 3 times the money of my opponent, I can tell you there's a 99% chance I'm going to beat the person. This time it's in record numbers now, and it's not moving numbers. So that has to be somewhat of a concern for the Kamala camp.
Yeah, I think the
Moving
problem is,
numbers in
she's only
polls.
had a couple months to do this. She hasn't had much time to campaign. Yeah, and there's a direct correlation between how long you have to convince people and how things turn out at the other end of it. She's just,
Right.
she's a newcomer. People didn't know her. This is a tough race. That's another reason why it's so fascinating. She comes in here trying to prove perhaps the English method, which is to have a limited campaign after Trump and Joe Biden have been essentially running for this election for years now.
30,000 in one arena filled out, 45,000 in another, 55,000 in Houston, Texas. 75,000 in the Ellipse last night. I like those numbers a lot. So we'll see.
Yep, we'll have to see, and of course, it's all going to really come down to the battleground states, of which Pennsylvania is one of the key battleground states, mainly because it has so many electoral college delegates. I guess I'll call them delegates or voters. So your thought here on Pennsylvania, Jim? I'm just going to go on a limb and say that you do believe Harris is going to win Pennsylvania. And so the only question is by how much?
Let me get back to you. I do. I mean, the PA Dems hooked up with the coordinated campaign early. They staffed up. They're everywhere. And it gets back to the closing. Who's better equipped for closing? And here we are at the closing moments.
Mm-hmm.
Coordinated campaign is in all 67 counties. We have not taken the T for granted since 2010 when we opened up the 67 county strategy. I just think retail wins, and for no other reason. Put everything else aside. That's it.
Yep.
That's why I think she wins PA.
All right, Governor.
I'm going to, unusual for me, I'm going to agree with Jim because of this. They're doing retail better than they have ever done it. Back in 2016, when Trump was running, I knew something was going on. I was traveling out to St. Vincent in Westmoreland County, deep blue Westmoreland County, and all I saw were Trump signs. I saw one sign for Hillary and it said Hillary for prison. And that was it. Okay. And I believe signs are an indication that people are willing to put up those signs. They're going to do the work. They're getting out there. In this race, I see many more signs for Kamala than not more than Trump. Trump signs are up there, but a much greater increase in her signs compared to 4 years ago, and obviously compared to in 10, or 16. So I looked at that. Now I went up Sue and I took a vacation. We went up to the Finger Lakes. We're in upstate New York, which is traditionally a Republican area. And we went around the Finger Lakes, and I saw a lot of Kamala signs, Kamala wall signs everywhere up there. Trump signs were there too. They've got a ground game going. And if that ground game that they're putting in signs is transferring to getting the vote out early, I won't use the word often, Jim, but early, then I think that, I would have to say, if you made me take a pick, I think that ground game is what wins it for her.
Okay. Joe or Keith?
I'll let Joe first.
Well, I think the governor's right about the ground game. I understand from folks out east that you can't rent a van or a bus in the Philadelphia area or in the collar counties because they've all been rented by Kamala Harris's campaign, the Harris Walz campaign. So they are ready for that ground game. They are ready to get those voters to the polls, and they've also captured the market on the vehicles you need to get people to the polls. So I put some value on that, and I'm gonna say that I think she wins Pennsylvania by 3 points.
Wow. Okay.
Oh,
Keith.
well, I'm on the side that, as I said, it's going to go one or the other, obviously, and I'm thinking election night, and I'm believing it's going to go to Trump on election night, and one of the reasons I believe that is, as much as all these issues are important, taxes and abortion and the trade deficit and the wars raging around the world and all these things. The two that I still think hold sway as election day approaches are financially motivated. It's the economy and it's the border. And the border is an economic issue because even states that don't have a huge effect of an influx of illegal immigration realize that they're getting health care, they're getting education, they're getting Social Security. That money's coming out of the coffers for illegal immigration, and those are two things. Although the trade deficit, the war, a lot of this is gray to people, but they understand what closing the border means. They understand whether they're financially better off than they were 4 years ago, and are they willing to turn a page on that and take a chance with the former president returning a more robust economy. And I think everybody in America realizes one thing: if he has a second inaugural address, one of the lines in his second inaugural address for President Trump is, "Troops are heading to the border as I give this speech." I mean, they know that he will close the border. And although you will not get rid of, or you won't have the deportation of 10 million illegals and 400,000 criminals, there will be a policy for deportation. So the money, the Social Security, the health care, it'll stop. It's an imperfect, you'll never get them all. But at least there'll be a general policy put forth that we're no longer going to accept illegals among the ranks of the citizens of this country. And that dovetails to why we're doing so well with Hispanics. Up, now the number's right around, last poll I said is he could be getting as many as 49%. It's because they played by the rules. They waited years. They paid their dues, took years to bring their family there, and now they see others coming across and getting checks instantly, and they feel violated. So there is an anger. They more than anyone want this to stop and go back to a more even-handed process of legal immigration. So on those two issues, I think the economics issues break for the former president on both those issues. And how many times have we heard for 40 years, it's the economy, stupid. So if that's true, I'm trying to remember what race that was, guys. Somebody said that it was a long time ago. One of the candidates said that it was the
That
economy,
was
stupid.
Clinton
Who was it?
HW.
Clinton in the first book. Yeah.
Yep,
Yes.
Clinton
Okay,
and
there you go.
HW. Yep,
All
yep.
right. So I mean,
92.
so what I'm saying is, I think that might be still true today.
Okay, good.
And well, Phil,
We
you're
just
asking about Pennsylvania. I think it will be a nail biter. I do believe the former president will win Pennsylvania. But let me say something I've been telling anyone that wants to listen. For McCormick to have a chance to win
Yeah.
this Senate seat, I said that Trump has can't win by on a margin. He has to win by 2 points or more. He can't win by
I agree,
50,000
Keith.
or
I've been telling
100,000.
people the same thing. Yeah.
He needs to win by 2, 3. If he wins by 2 or 3, he might bring him in. But if that doesn't happen, there's no coattails for McCormick.
Yeah, I agree.
Well,
I've been telling people exactly the same thing.
Have you? Okay.
Yes.
it's interesting you brought that up, Keith, because I was going to segue to that. We've spent about 30 minutes on the presidential race, so let's spend just a couple of minutes here on the Senate race in Pennsylvania, which is key to who will control the Senate and how much of a control they will have, I should say, after this election. I don't know what happened to Jim here. He's kind of disappeared on us. I don't know if you're still there, Jim, or not, but I hope you are. But the latest polling indicates that Casey has, this is from the Real Clear Politics, has 47, I'm sorry, yeah, 47.4 and McCormick 45.8. And I will ask this question to you, Joe, and that is that it's especially on the conservative side, they're making point that Casey started saying that, he voted for or agreed with Trump on this issue and this issue and this issue in some of his ads. Does that indicate to you at all that Casey is in trouble and he's trying to just now court Trump supporters?
No, it's a game of inclusion. We've heard that many times, and the criticism of Trump is always he's throwing people out of the boat into the water, when traditionally politicians are trying to pull people out of the water into the boat, and Casey's just trying to do that.
Okay, Governor, your thoughts?
I think that this is the toughest race that Senator Casey has had running for the Senate. He's never had this strong of a candidate against him. I think obviously he's worried that I think if Trump wins Pennsylvania, even if it's close, then it goes to McCormick in the Senate race. I don't want you to forget also we have 2 statewide row officers that are up for election, the Attorney General's race, the Treasurer's race, actually 3, and the Auditor General's race. Years ago, when you could vote straight ballot, whoever won the presidency was probably going to bring everybody along with them. The interesting part now is that you can't do that. It really has made them obviously lower on the ballot. They get less votes, but who's going to come out and vote for them? Go down the ballot and vote for those candidates. I will go and say I support Mr. Sunday for the Attorney General's race. I have a particular interest in that. I think somebody ought to be qualified in the courtroom to be able to be the Attorney General. I won't go into the other races. But I think going back to McCormick, he's extremely qualified. Bob Casey's qualified. But I think it's, people are, if they vote for McCormick, it's because they want to change from somebody who's been a politician for 27 years.
Okay.
Anybody who knows politics knows that sometimes timing bites you in the tail. And quite frankly, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Our senior senator has had the great fortune of 3 election cycles, 06, 12, and 18, being landslide national victories for the Democratic Party. This year, it's not so. I mean, so there is a healthy concern that he's in a cycle that's absolutely competitive compared to the 3 cycles that he was fortunate enough to run in when he was elected those 3 times. Also, a 3-term senator and somebody who was in politics, you could add another decade to that before he became senator, somebody who's been in front of Pennsylvanians for this long and is still polling under 50% with a few days left in election, he's going to have a healthy concern. And the numbers you just told me was the margin is less than 2% on the polling. So that's margin of error for sure. So all those things are concerning. But I'm going to differ slightly from from the respect I have for the former governor in saying I still think Trump needs a bigger win. I think he needs at least 2 points in Pennsylvania to bring McCormick with him. But that said, I believe that he's headed for at least a 2-point victory in Pennsylvania.
Okay, we have to wrap it up. And again, I don't know what happened to our buddy Jim Byrne here, but maybe he had a call he had to get to. But go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I just want to make one final point. When you introduce us, at the beginning of our episodes here. In the
Mm-hmm.
past, you've always introduced Governor Corbett as the last Republican governor of Pennsylvania. Today, you said the former Republican governor. Jim and I are voting for you going back to the last Republican governor of Pennsylvania.
Semantics. All right, you got
Well,
me.
but you know what? I hope I'm not the last Republican governor.
Yeah. All right. Well, the last elected Republican guy. I don't know. Anyway, that's
That's
good.
right.
Then. All right. One final question for you guys, and that is who takes control of the Senate or who maintains control? And then, secondly, who takes the House? This is a very fast answer for all of you.
I think
I think the House.
They're defending many more seats in the Senate. I think with West Virginia and others that we're looking at, it's just a year that works for Republicans.
Yeah.
So I think the Republicans will take the Senate back. But the House it's going to be a nail biter. But I'm praying that they maintain control, but it will be a nail biter on election night.
I agree
Sure.
with him. I think they take the Senate, but they lose the House.
I
Okay,
agree.
that would be
I
the
agree.
Republicans. And Joe, you're
Yeah.
saying the same thing.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well,
And
gentlemen, thanks.
whoever becomes the president has a divided Congress, and that's not all bad.
That's
Yeah,
not all bad.
maybe we'll get something done.
Yeah, maybe that's the case. Maybe they have to reach agreement on some things. Exactly. Again, we don't know what happened to our buddy Jim Byrne, but obviously
He
we
told us
miss
he
him
can
for the
only
last.
stay-
I'm sorry. What?
I remember he told us he can only stay for a period of time.
Okay.
He
All
had
right. I thought maybe it was all your arguments just chased him away or something, Governor.
He'd never abandon me.
All right.
Others have, but not.
Yeah, not Jim. Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Chase.
We'll continue our look at
See you
politics
guys.
after the election with analysis of what happened in our next episode. Again, if you happen to be watching or listening to this podcast, I urge you to hit the like or the subscribe button. But for right now, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again on our next edition of Trunk and Tales.